Imagine a president who says we will stand up and defeat radical Islamic terrorism. And we will call it by its name.
Senator Ted Cruz earlier today at Liberty University. If elected commander-in-chief, how will he deal with America's enemies? We continue with the senator. What do you think our top 3 security issues are? And you said you would name radical Islamists. Right. Why do you think the president will not? He refuses to.
Look, it is a bizarre Orwellian doublespeak. That this is a president who will not utter the words radical Islamic terrorism. And we see, for example, several weeks ago when you had the horrific terrorist attack in Paris, and he referred to it as a random act of violence. When radical Islamists go in with butcher knives to a kosher deli to murder Jews because of their Jewish faith, it's not random. Mm-hmm. It is naked anti-Semitism. Likewise, when 22 Coptic Christians were beheaded by ISIS, and the first White House statement came out and described it as they're being killed because of their Egyptian citizenship. They weren't killed because of their citizenship. They were killed because they were Christians, because radical Islamic terrorists were murdering them because of their faith. And I'll tell you, Pope Francis, his comment, what was their blood confesses Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. We can't confront the evil that we're facing if we refuse to acknowledge it for what it is, or if the president is an apologist for it, which is what he was at the prayer breakfast.
What do you think it's going to take? A lot of people, military people, will tell you that we ultimately will need boots on the ground to deal with ISIS. Do you agree with that?
I think it should be driven by the military objective. I think the objective should be to destroy ISIS. Now, we do have boots on the ground with the Kurds. The Peshmerga, the fighting forces of the Kurds, are effective, able fighters. They're allies of the United States. We should be arming them. The Obama administration is sending weapons to Baghdad who won't pass it on to the Kurds. So in my view, the Kurds should be our principal boots on the ground. We should be using overwhelming Air Force power. And then beyond that, if we need to embed special forces or have some limited ground troops driven by the mission, we should. But it shouldn't be a political decision, yes, boots on the ground, no boots on the ground. It should be a military decision, what's necessary to destroy ISIS.
Do you think the president made a mistake? George Bush, the president, warned in 2007 that if we don't keep intelligence forces and training forces on the ground, that the enemy will get worse and we will have to go back in. It seems that it was a prediction that ended up fairly accurate.
Well, it was, and there were many mistakes, but the most pervasive one is projecting weakness to the world. The consistent pattern of the Obama-Clinton foreign policy has been abandoning our friends and allies, whether it is Israel, whether it is the UK, whether it is Canada, and coddling and appeasing our enemies. And that message of weakness has been heard. It's why Putin is bellicose and invading his neighbors. It's why China is more and more aggressive in Asia, and it is why Iran is galloping towards nuclear weapons capability. And the latter, Iran, I think, is the single greatest national security threat facing America.
Iran is number 1. What's number 2?
Radical Islam generally.
Number 3?
A more aggressive Russia.
Okay, let's start with number 1. How do you deal with Iran? You hear about the president in the sunset years of this deal that they, in the meantime, they'd be able to spin their centrifuges, some 6,000 of them. In the short term, they'd be able to enrich uranium, and at the end of this 10-year period, ultimately be able to build a nuclear weapon.
I agree with what Prime Minister Netanyahu said many, many months ago, that this deal is a very, very bad deal and an historic mistake. This deal paves the path towards Iran acquiring nuclear weapons. And if they acquire nuclear weapons, I think the odds are unacceptably high they'd use them, either against Israel or America. Now, your question was, what should we do? I've introduced legislation in the Senate that would immediately reimpose sanctions on Iran, that would strengthen them to make them more crippling, and then lays out a clear roadmap for how they can lift them. If they want to lift them, they would have to disassemble all 19,000 centrifuges, hand over all of their enriched uranium, shut down their ICBM program, which exists only to carry a nuclear weapon to America, and stop being the leading world state sponsor of terrorism. We should have more stick and less carrot.
This very weekend, our Secretary of State said we're close to a deal at the very same moment with the top Iranian mullah chanting death to America. Is that somebody we should even be sitting down at the table with?
And Sean, every year in Iran, they celebrate what's called Death to America Day. It is the anniversary of Iran taking Americans hostages in the 1970s. If history teaches one thing, it is that if somebody tells you they want to kill you,
believe them.
Believe them.
What do you think about the president and his treatment of Prime Minister Netanyahu and Israel?
It is shameful. It is disgraceful. This administration has been the most antagonistic administration to Israel in the history of this country.
Last question. So you mentioned number 3 is Putin. We talked about terrorism. We talked about Iran. How do you deal with his territorial ambitions? How do you stop Putin? I mean, the price of oil has crippled his economy a little bit, but...
Yes. Look, Putin is fundamentally a KGB thug. He's not a complicated man. He's been very candid. He says he considers the greatest geopolitical disaster of modern times the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And he has stated he's trying, I believe, to reassemble as much of it as possible. Putin only understands strength. Now listen, nobody wants to see a shooting war between America and Russia. 2 nuclear superpowers, you don't engage in a shooting war. But there are things we can be doing. We should be standing with Ukraine and arming Ukraine right now so the Ukrainians can defend themselves. We should honor our treaty commitments. We should have, when Putin invaded Crimea, we should have immediately gone forward and installed the anti-ballistic missile batteries in Poland and the Czech Republic that had been scheduled to go into effect, and that the president had canceled in 2009 in an effort to appease Putin. The appeasement didn't work. And third, we should immediately clear for export liquid natural gas. Putin uses energy as his tool of economic blackmail. It produced jobs here at home, and it would weaken Russia and empower our friends.
Could we be energy independent in 5 years? And how big an impact on the economy?
We could absolutely be energy independent in North America. If you bring in Canada and Mexico, the reserves we have in North America.
Because Putin can turn off the spigot to Western Europe, therefore he has a lot of leverage.
That is exactly right. And I've introduced in the Senate the American Energy Renaissance Act, the most comprehensive legislation to unchain the private sector to create millions of high-paying jobs. You want growth, you want to solve the budget and the deficit and the debt. Millions of high-paying jobs in energy and also in manufacturing from low-cost energy is a critical element to how we do it.